Back to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe with Tim Bielik, Lance Reisland. And this is it, guys. Our final rounds only mock draft. We're going to do 4 rounds. We are going back to the old, reliable Pro Football Focus Simulator. We did make some changes, though. We're going to lean a little more towards PFF's board. We're going to care a little more about positional value. Kind of leaving draft for need lower. But we did up the randomness a little bit. So this is going to get interesting here in our final mock draft. So I'm going to hit enter draft, and we are going to barrel ahead here to the number 74 overall pick for the Cleveland Browns. We're just about there. Here we are. Antonio Johnson just went to the Houston Texans. So here we go. There are already some names that have not been here, Tim, as we kind of go through this list. Kelee Ringo still available, a cornerback. I would imagine Andrew Berry would be intrigued by a cornerback projected to go higher than number 74. I'd imagine he'd be interested in someone like that. Who's a name that stands out to you as I kind of scroll through this list here?
Well, you mentioned corner. Travius Hodges-Tomlinson from TCU fits the age profile, and we were talking about slot corners earlier. Hodges-Tomlinson is the perfect frame for a slot corner. He's smaller. He was tremendous at TCU, one of those key guys for TCU that was really, impactful and a big reason why that defense was as good as it was, why the Horned Frogs made it all the way to the national championship. He's interesting. What other offense we got? I know you mentioned Kelee Ringo. I mean, cornerback from the SEC. I mean, there's perfect Andrew Berry picks. Jonathan Mingo's right there. Again, we talked, I'd be stunned if he was at I'm starting to get the idea I'd be stunned if he was at 74. I think if you're going to get him, you got to trade up into the early 60s to get him. And I think, that'd be smart because Andrew Berry, I don't think he's going to make 8 picks this weekend. I think he's going to trade. So I would assume at the very least he trades out to get a 2024 pick. Ooh, some other good options. Tyjae Spears, Tyler Scott, Tank Bigsby. All the T's are there, so I feel like one of these receivers, Lance. It feels like we've talked so much about Jonathan Mingo on this podcast. I know Tyler Scott is a Browns fan favorite. It just feels like this is a real opportunity, especially looking at the players on the board, to get a good receiver for this football team at number 74.
Tim talked about me with Parker Washington. He has made me kind of crush on Mingo a little bit. And he's kind of gone by Tyler Scott. Tyler Scott was back when we first started this months ago. He was my initial pick in the 3rd round. I just love his suddenness. I love his raw speed. I mean, you're talking about a guy who is like a 4.29 kind of guy, like a 4. He's an elite guy, an easy yard guy. Kelee, the Ringo kid, that's a guy who can play. He's an uber athlete, so he can be a safety as well. He can play safety. He can play corner, so he can do a lot of things. Jordan Battle's there. We've talked about we've all liked Tim before. Spears, Tim has talked about him a lot. He's a fantastic runner. I'm gonna go either Mingo or Scott. I think we go skill here, and I think we go Mingo or Scott. I love Mingo's frame. Mingo, if you're ask me which one, I think they're both fantastic. But Mingo's frame and availability with that frame to play each week, I would go. If we go receiver, I would go Mingo.
So Tim, are you kind of in the same boat that Jonathan Mingo should be the pick here over? Let's say we just narrow it down to Mingo and Scott. Is Mingo the guy you would take?
Yeah, I think so. Speed with size. I mean, you talk about Tyler Scott obviously being tremendously fast. It shows in his highlights. He's fast. He separates well. Mingo's fast. He separates very well, but he separates really well in his speed at 220 pounds. You already have one dynamic, athletic, bigger receiver in Donovan Peoples-Jones, maybe not as fast as Jonathan Mingo, more of a contested catch guy who can run away from defenses. Jonathan Mingo's a guy who I think once he gets his feet wet in the NFL, once he kind of gets up to speed, I think he will run away from some people in the NFL. He's a guy who I think is going to be a better pro player than he was a college player. And where he could fit on this offense, he is a guy he wouldn't have to play right away. Maybe similar to how the Chiefs kind of grew Sky Moore into the offense. I don't mean to bring it back around to Sky Moore, but similar kind of role where maybe he kind of works in rotationally a little bit behind some veterans. and then as he grows a little more, you slowly start to deploy him. I'm not going to go ahead and say Jonathan Mingo is going to catch a touchdown pass for the Browns in the Super Bowl this year. Don't anybody think I'm saying that, but I think in terms of, growing a player in the offense and adding something you don't really have, I think Jonathan Mingo is a good fit there.
Okay, so I think we're on the same page here. We're going to draft Jonathan Mingo, and we are off to a good start in this draft as we move ahead to pick number 98, the comp pick. There's Ringo still on the board. Tim, who stands out to you? Some names still left over from the last pick. Who stands out to you as we kind of scroll through this list?
Tyjae Spears from Tulane. I know people are going to say, well, why are you not taking an edge rusher? Why are you not taking a defensive player here, considering the issues the Browns had on that side of the ball? And the reason is simple. Watch Tyjae Spears play football. He was one of the biggest stars of the Senior Bowl last year. He had an amazing season. His highlight package, one of the most fun things you're going to watch. He's a great compliment to Nick Chubb because he's fast and he finds space and knows exactly what to do with it. He was great against USC in the Cotton Bowl. I know USC's defense was not very good. They did not tackle very well. But still, for a group of 5 running back and behind a group of 5 offensive line to do that against USC, it's pretty darn special. And we've talked before about adding explosiveness to this offense. If you're going to try to keep up with the Chiefs, the Bengals, the Bills, you name it in the AFC, it's not just going to be about defense. You need to score points. You need to have guys who, anytime they touch the football, are a threat to do some damage to you. And I think, the Browns don't have a lot of those guys. If they come out, maybe this is the offensive-minded guy in me, but getting 2 of those guys on day 2 of the draft, that should make Browns fans pretty happy, I think.
Lance, do you like a running back here? Was there another name that you spotted that you want to make a case for?
Well, actually, before it started, I'm like, I love Nick Salvaderi from ODU, and what it shows me is I can't be in the war room with Tim, because as I'm listening to Tim, I'm like, yeah, Spears is the guy. So I was talked off my ledge really quick. He's really, really good on film. He's really, really good on film against good people. I like him a lot. I had him in my top 5 backs in terms of guys who are good in space, good out of the backfield. He can run that zone. He can run that gap scheme. He's a willing pass protector. He understands scheme. Coach at Tulane does a great job in terms of what they run. I'm all about Spears. I really like to tackle, though. I think the Salvaderi kid is going to Salvaderi. I think he's going to be a really, really, really good pro. He's long. He's athletic. He blocks in the second level well. He can play multiple positions. He's kind of like one of those big guys I like in terms of he almost fits that, like I was once a tight end, and I realized the money's at tackle kind of guy. And those are the tackles I really like. Those NFL tackles, there's a high percentage that were dying to be tight ends or went to Iowa to be the tight end, and now they're a tackle. So he kind of reminds me of that. But I think what the Browns need to score points. The AFC just got even more explosive, right? So I think you got to go Spears here and put points on the board.
Okay, so I feel like this is a little high for a running back and for a tackle, but I think if I had to choose the 2, and I'm speaking about how I think the Browns might look at it. If I had to choose between the 2, I think tackle is certainly the less pressing need, and I don't know if I see them taking a tackle necessarily on day 2 of the draft. Now, we might have to revisit this here at number 111, but I think, again, we have consensus. This is what happens when everyone in the war room is singing from the same hymnal, as we like to say. So here we go. 2 picks in round 4, starting with number 111. Ringo finally off the board at 109 to the Raiders. Trey Palmer goes 110 to the Falcons. But I mean, that would be fun. The Falcons just adding more weapons to their receiving core. Of course, as we discussed earlier, it might not matter if you don't have the quarterback, but they'll figure that out at some point. Tim, who do you like here on the board at 111?
Yeah, I think with Salvaderi still there, I think there's an interesting question I almost want to ask you, Dan. I mean, we don't know. There's obviously the Browns have, I think, till May 2nd to get Jedrick Wills on his 5th-year option. If we don't know, if that doesn't happen by Friday, would you imagine an early draft pick of a tackle earlier than we expect any indication, or just kind of maybe they just see it as their version of BPA?
I think it would be more their version of best player available. I don't think it would be an indication that they're not going to do it. I mean, obviously, I think they know what they're going to do already. They just haven't said. I would be a little surprised if they don't pick it up, because even if Wills isn't playing to the level that they would like, that you want your number 10 overall pick to play to, it's $14 million, which I know feels like a lot of money, but honestly, you can live with that for your starting left tackle. And you're not going to go cheaper if you go the free agent route or if you were to franchise him next year. So I don't know that we're going to get any sort of indication as to whether they picked that up or didn't. If they, who knows? Maybe by the time people hear this, they've already announced their decision. But I don't think there's any sort of indication there as to what they're thinking if they took a tackle, especially in the 4th round.
Right, and I mean, I didn't mean to take us off that path and derail the conversation in any direction. I just
no, it's a fair question, and obviously, I do think the one thing they did tell us when they extended Jack Conklin was that they don't view James Hudson as a long-term option right now at either tackle position. But I think that's one of the cards they've shown us. So I think certainly some kind of young tackle is in play at some point in this draft.
Yeah, and there's a lot to like about Saldiveri, in this position if you want to go tackle. But I think it's time to go for some defense. So let's see who's out there. KJ Henry was a former 5-star, didn't quite have the production I think you would hope for as a 5-star, which is kind of a theme, unfortunately, with Clemson. Riley Moss from Iowa is an intriguing defensive back.
There he is.
There he is. There's Ivan Pace, our guy, Lance's guy, my guy a little bit.
Sold.
Smaller guy. Again, it's like he's the defensive Bryce Young. If he's 3 inches taller, there's no way in the world he is available in this spot in the draft. But I think I saw Byron Young, the defensive tackle for Alabama, a little lower on the list. I think just a couple spots.
Yep,
down
there he
the
is.
Direction.
We should also mention Zach. Also mention Zach Harrison on the board here still.
Yeah, I think. Well, there's 2 Byron Youngs in this draft, which is going to get very confusing. There's a defensive tackle Byron Young who fits in the Andrew Berry age guardrails at 22 years old, and then there's Byron Young, who's an edge rusher from Tennessee, who's 25 years old. So you'd be going the complete opposite. But I think this Byron Young would be, you're looking for defensive tackles who play with some power, kind of run-stopping defensive tackles. Byron Young fits that mold, seems like a nice, boring defensive tackle option. Probably needs to add a little weight, kind of a similar problem that the Browns have had with these defensive tackles they take in the passes. They're smaller, but I think as Young kind of adds weight, it may just make his power game a little better. He seems like a guy that, say they, after the draft, they go sign out Woods, all of a sudden, you could have a nice promising, young player in Byron Young. You let go of grow in the background, learn from another Alabama defensive tackle and Dalvin Tomlinson about, playing the run defense in the NFL. I do like the fit. And, we've seen the Commanders build an amazing defensive line, basically as an Alabama pipeline. It would be a good idea. I like Byron Young in this spot. I know we've liked Pace, but I think if you have good defensive tackle play, it makes the linebackers better. So that's why I would go Young over Pace here.
Okay, so Lance, how risky are we feeling? Because I think there's 3 players here that I look at. Byron Young, one of them, Zach Harrison, another, and Ivan Pace, another. So there's 3 players here at 111, and we go on the clock at 126 again. So I don't know if all 3 of these players make it to 126, but who's the one of these 3 guys that you would be most devastated to miss out on?
Ivan Pace.
Oh,
okay. But I like what Tim said in terms of the building from the inside out, building those just like offensively, starting with those guards in the center, getting those DTs. I think the Browns have addressed with Hurst and Tomlinson. I think they've addressed some of those needs. I think linebacker in terms of having a thumper. I know he's only 5'10", between 5'10" and 6 foot, but Ivan Pace is an absolute thumper. He's 235. Again, he's an outlier. I think Tim said it best. He's a guy who, just like Bryce Young, if he's 6 foot, if he's 6'1", you can argue he's the best linebacker in the country. I think there's not a better inside linebacker film. And I try to watch, especially linebackers, I try to watch whole games. I don't like to watch just highlight films. The guy is an absolute game wrecker. But I like, it's hard to argue. It's hard to argue with building yourself inside out. I don't like taking, the D linemen are tough just because you have a work in progress. Harrison, I don't know if he bends well enough. Tim broke him down really well a couple weeks ago. I don't think he bends well enough right now, but he's heavy and definitely can anchor in there. I'd be really sad if we lost. But once again, he's an outlier, so he might be around. But I'd hate to lose pace here. I would really hate to lose pace.
Let's say we're going to plan to try and take both. Who would you hate to lose most of these two players?
I think I would I think Lance is kind of talking me into pace a little bit because I think with Byron Young, yes, I like him. I actually did look up his weight, 294 pounds. So he's close to 300 pounds. It's not like a lighter defensive tackle. He could probably add weight, and his birthday's not – he's 22 years old, but his birthday's not till November, so he's kind of a young 22. So he could add weight. Again, I think, between guys like Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, Dalvin Tomlinson, you have to love the Alabama to the NFL defensive line pipeline there. Pace is not going to get any bigger, but again, size is going to be the only issue with Ivan Pace. And I mentioned this, I think it was the first mock draft. Jim Schwartz was talking about David Long, the linebacker from the Titans, how important he was to that defense. He was a smaller guy too. So, as long as you have the range and you have the instincts and the playmaking ability to be a linebacker, maybe you can get away with being a little smaller. And the Browns really haven't addressed linebacker outside of, obviously re-signing Anthony Walker to that contract. They really haven't done anything to that position. So I think for me, I was talking about Byron Young, but I think the more I think about it, what you need right now, and I know drafting necessarily for need is never a good idea, but I think if there's a tie in my mind, it's going to go to what do I need a little more of? And I think right now, you have a veteran or defensive tackle. You can probably, maybe they can get another before training camp. I don't know what kind of linebacker you can get now in free agency. And Pace is a guy I think who could play pretty quickly and at the very minimum be an impact player on special teams from day one.
And one of the things you pointed out, obviously, discussing need, and this is not a team that generally drafts for needs specifically, but Andrew Berry does sometimes leave a spot open when it comes to the draft. So think left tackle a few years ago, think corner 2 a few years ago when they took Greg Newsome. So sometimes he'll leave a spot open. And, if you think maybe Anthony Walker and Sione Takitaki, if those guys aren't going to be ready and you want to bring in a guy, this team has shown they aren't afraid of a smaller linebacker. So Lance, you did it again. I think 111 is where you got us last time too. You did it again. You talked us into a player. We're taking Ivan Pace and we're just going to hope that the other guy we want is still there. Let me go.
He's gonna be next
no. Guess where he went? Byron Young goes to the Baltimore Ravens at number 124. That stings. Of all the teams to lose him to.
That would be such a Ravens pick. That's the Eric DeCosta blueprint. Is he goes for those? He loves taking sliders.
Well, that's all right because Ivan Pace is going to make their life miserable. 2 weeks every year as well. So whatever, he can have Byron Young. We're moving on. Final pick here in our Browns only mock draft. Our tackle, Saldivari, still on the board. Tim, anybody else you see here that you like? There's Zach Harrison still on the board. We've talked about him. Who else do you like?
I think I know we just took a running back, but Israel Abanikanda right there. Jair Brown's still there. Jair Brown here would be a great fit. I know the Browns in this mock haven't addressed edge rusher, and I know we talked about how it's number 1 need, number 1A need. But I think here at this point of the draft, I would not try to reach for a guy. I think the best available in a similar grouping. I like Brown again, just, as a guy who can have an impact as a third safety. If Jim Schwartz wants to implement 3 safeties out there, they don't really have a proven third safety out there. And you mentioned Lance obviously talked about Jair Brown having hybrid, abilities, he can play the free, he can play the strong, and he can kind of fill the gap that is left behind, whatever's asked of him of being that third safety in certain situations. That's why I would go for him. I know Yaya Diaby's on the board. I keep thinking in my mind that if the Browns could use more impact in that coverage, in that safety position, especially because we don't know, what Grant Delpit's future with the team is going to be after the season. So Jair Brown, it could also in the case essentially be like you're drafting potentially a starter for 2024 in case they decide to not bring back Grant Delpit.
Lance, sometimes the draft just falls your way, and maybe we just need to call up our buddy Steve in Philadelphia from earlier and say, come on up, announce the pick. We're getting your guy Jair Brown.
Well, there's two things that stand out. One is I took you guys let me take Coons over Brown 3 weeks ago, so I'm definitely leaning Brown here. But the reason I like him is that again and this is what Tim said 3 weeks ago that I really liked, is that you could, even though I like Kuntz and he has this uber fantastic athletic ability, and it's hard to pass with the guys. Brown's a guy who could be a starter, and he could be a starter quick. So you're talking about a guy who's in the 4th round that could be a starter really quick, and he's a guy who's going to play a lot because he can play both positions. He's an absolute playmaker, so he's a guy who's going to play a lot, whether he's at the free or whether he's at the strong safety. He's a guy that would come in and he would probably be the backup or in that mix right now. So injuries happen, things happen. So this one is an absolute no-brainer in my opinion.
Okay, we're doing it. Jair Brown is the pick for the Cleveland Browns to wrap up the draft. And so we'll recap it here real quick. And then I got one more question for you guys before we call it a pod. Jonathan Mingo, number 74. Tyjae Spears, number 98. Ivan Pace, number 111. Jair Brown, number 1. Wow, Lance, they gave you a D+ for Ivan Pace. I don't know about that. Jair Brown, number 126. Do you notice how I said that they gave Lance a D+ for that?
It was
not the rest of us.
It was we till pick 111. It was we.
I think PFF's got a bug in the war room right now. They've got one of those little bugs in the war room listening to us, because looking at it's only a 2-spot reach. Mingo was a 9-spot reach, and that got a B. So I don't know.
Yeah,
tell who
strange.
Like. That's funny.